My name is Zara Al-Harith. I am 32 years old, and everything I once believed about God, truth, and my own identity has been shattered and rebuilt in a way I never imagined possible. And I am telling you this not as someone who read a story, but as someone who lived through it, someone who almost lost her life, her family, and her sanity before discovering something I was never supposed to find. I was born into a world where everything was already decided for me before I could even speak. A world of royal expectation, strict control, and silent fear disguised as devotion, where Islam was not just a belief system, but the foundation of our existence, the law that shaped our days, and the invisible chain that held our thoughts captive. From the moment I was old enough to understand language, I was taught how to submit, how to obey, how to silence every question before it could even fully form in my mind. Because in my world, questions were dangerous and curiosity was rebellion. I remember sitting as a little girl on polished marble floors, reciting verses I did not understand, my voice trembling slightly each time I made a mistake, watching the stern eyes of my teacher as she corrected me with a tone that carried no warmth, only expectation, only pressure, only the quiet threat that failure was not acceptable. I learned quickly that love was conditional, that approval came only through perfection, and that God, as I was taught to know him, was always watching, always judging, always waiting for me to fail. There was no intimacy in my prayers, no comfort in my worship, only routine and obligation, movements repeated over and over again until they became automatic, until my lips spoke words my heart could no longer feel. As I grew older, the walls around my life became tighter, more defined, more suffocating, and yet from the outside everything looked beautiful, perfect even. The kind of life people dream about, filled with luxury, influence and respect. But inside I felt something I could never explain, something hollow, something missing, like I was living in a carefully decorated prison where every detail was designed to keep me comfortable enough not to question, but controlled enough never to escape. I was told who I could speak to, how I should dress, what I should believe, and eventually who I would marry. And each decision was presented to me not as a choice, but as a destiny, as obedience to God, as the only path that would keep me safe and accepted. And so I obeyed, because disobedience was not an option I believed I had, because I had seen what happened to those who stepped out of line, the whispers, the sudden disappearances, the way certain names were never spoken again, as if those people had never existed at all. Fear became my constant companion, quiet but ever present, shaping my thoughts, controlling my actions, and silencing the small voice inside me that dared to ask why. Why did I feel so empty when I had everything? Why did my prayers feel like they were hitting a wall and falling back to me unanswered? Why did I feel more alone surrounded by people than I did in complete silence? I never spoke those questions out loud, not even in the privacy of my own thoughts for too long, because I had been trained to shut them down, to replace them with rehearsed answers, to convince myself that the problem was not the system, but me, that I was not devout enough, not pure enough, not obedient enough. So I tried harder, I prayed longer, I memorized more, I performed better, hoping that somehow the emptiness would disappear, hoping that one day I would feel what everyone else claimed to feel, a connection, a certainty, a peace that never came. Instead, the more I tried, the heavier everything became. The more distant God felt, the more I began to wonder if something was fundamentally wrong, not just with me, but with everything I had been taught. But that thought was too dangerous to hold on to, so I buried it deeper each time it surfaced, convincing myself that silence was safer than truth. And for a long time, silence was all I knew. Silence in my questions, silence in my pain, and silence in the quiet desperation that grew inside me, year after year. Until one day, that silence was broken in a way I could never have predicted, in a way that would change everything I thought I knew about God, about truth, and about my own life. And if you're listening to me right now, if something in my voice feels familiar, if you have ever felt that same emptiness, that same quiet longing you cannot explain, then I want you to stay with me, because what I'm about to share is not just my story. It might also be the answer you have been searching for without even realizing it. And before I go any further, I want to say this gently. If this story speaks to you in any way, do not keep it to yourself. Take a moment to subscribe, to like this video, to share it with someone who might need to hear it. I know, because silence nearly destroyed me, and maybe your action today could help someone else find the truth before it is too late. From the outside, my life looked flawless, the kind of life people imagine when they think of royalty, a life wrapped in elegance, wealth, and influence. But the truth is, it felt like I was slowly suffocating in a place where everything was designed to look perfect while hiding what was broken underneath. My days followed a structure that never changed, waking before dawn for Fajr prayer, repeating the same movements, the same words, my lips speaking devotion while my heart felt nothing. Then moving through the routines of the day, surrounded by people who were always present, yet somehow never truly there for me. I was married at 19 to a man chosen for me, a man whose name carried weight, whose family strengthened alliances, and whose expectations for me were clear from the very beginning. I was to be obedient, silent, respectful, and above all, unquestioning. There was no conversation about love, no curiosity about compatibility, only duty. And I accepted it because I believed that was what a good woman did. That was what God required of me. But inside that marriage, I felt invisible, like my existence was reduced to a role I had to perform perfectly every single day. I remember one evening sitting across from my husband at a long dining table, the space between us filled with silence, the kind of silence that is not peaceful but heavy. And I realized I did not know him, not really, and he did not know me either, and neither of us seemed interested in changing that. My thoughts became my only escape, but even there, I had to be careful because I had been trained to monitor myself, to correct myself, to suppress anything that could be considered doubt. Flashbacks of my childhood lessons would surface often, my teacher's voice echoing in my mind, reminding me that questioning faith was the whisper of Shaitan, that curiosity could lead to destruction, that obedience was the only path to safety. And yet, despite all those warnings, something inside me refused to stay quiet. It started with small thoughts, barely noticeable at first, like wondering why God felt so distant, why every prayer felt like a performance instead of a connection, why fear was the foundation of everything I had been taught to believe. Those thoughts grew stronger over time, especially in the quiet moments when I was alone, when there was no one watching, no one listening, and I could allow myself to feel what I'd been suppressing for so long. I began to notice contradictions, things that did not align, teachings that seemed harsh and unforgiving, explanations that felt incomplete. But every time I tried to explore those thoughts, I would stop myself, afraid of where they might lead, because I knew the cost of going too far. I had seen it happen before, a distant relative who had asked too many questions, who had started to challenge certain teachings, and then one day she was simply gone. No explanation, no discussion, just silence, and a clear message to the rest of us that some boundaries were not meant to be crossed. That memory stayed with me, a constant reminder that curiosity was dangerous, but even fear could not completely silence what was growing inside me. One afternoon, during a private religious lesson, something happened that I could not take back. We were discussing obedience, the importance of submission, and the rewards promised in the afterlife. And as I listened, a question formed in my mind, stronger than anything I had felt before, and before I could stop myself, it slipped out. My voice was quiet, almost hesitant, but it was enough to change everything. I asked why, if we followed everything so strictly, there was still no assurance, why everything seemed based on fear instead of certainty, why it felt like no matter how much we did, it was never enough. The room went completely silent. I remember the way my teacher looked at me, her expression shifting from calm to something much colder, something that made my heart start pounding in my chest. She did not answer my question, not directly. Instead, she gave a response that felt like a warning, telling me that faith was not something to be questioned, that doubt was dangerous, that I needed to guard my heart. But it was not what she said that unsettled me the most. It was how she said it, the tone, the tension, the way the atmosphere in the room changed so quickly. I knew in that moment that I had crossed a line, and from that day forward, things were different. Subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but I could feel it. The way people spoke to me, the way they watched me, the slight changes in behavior that told me something had shifted. I was no longer just the obedient daughter, the perfect wife. I had become something else, something uncertain, something that needed to be observed. And even though no one said it out loud, I could feel it. I was being watched. And the question I asked that day did not leave the room when the lesson ended. It followed me, clung to me, echoed in my mind long after everyone else had moved on, as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, replaying the moment over and over again. The silence, the look on my teacher's face, the way the air itself seemed to tighten around me. My heart would not settle. It felt like I had stepped onto a path I did not understand and could not turn back from. I tried to pray, to calm myself, to push the thoughts away, but the words felt empty, rehearsed, disconnected from whatever was happening inside me. For the first time in my life, I allowed the question to fully exist without suppressing it, and it terrified me. If faith was supposed to bring peace, why was I constantly afraid? If God was merciful, why did I feel like I was always one mistake away from rejection? Those thoughts spiraled, growing louder, more persistent, until I felt like I was losing control of my own mind. The next morning, I noticed the first sign that something was wrong. My phone, which had always been my only small sense of privacy, felt different. Subtle changes, notifications appearing slower than usual, messages that seemed to have already been read, settings that I did not remember changing. It was small, almost easy to dismiss, but deep down I knew. I had heard stories before, quiet warnings passed between women, that once someone drew attention, their lives were no longer their own. Their movements, their conversations, everything could be monitored. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. That fear was making me paranoid, but the feeling would not go away. Later that day, my cousin Lena came to visit. She was one of the few people I trusted, someone who understood the unspoken rules of our world, but also carried a quiet awareness that there was more beyond it. We sat together in a private sitting room, speaking in low voices as we always did, careful not to attract attention. I hesitated before saying anything, but the weight inside me was too heavy to carry alone. I told her about the question I'd asked, about the way things felt different afterward. She did not react immediately. Instead, she looked at me in a way that made my chest tighten, like she already knew something I did not. Then she leaned closer and spoke softly, almost in a whisper that barely reached my ears. She told me to be careful, that people had disappeared for less, that curiosity was not something our world tolerated. Her words were not dramatic, they were calm, measured, and that made them even more terrifying. Because she was not speculating, she was reminding me of reality. That conversation stayed with me long after she left, her warning echoing in my mind, making every small detail around me feel more intense, more threatening. The walls of the palace, which had always felt like protection, now felt like confinement. Every glance from a servant, every pause in conversation when I entered a room, every unexpected silence felt like confirmation that something had shifted. And yet, despite the fear, something else was growing inside me, something I could not ignore anymore. The hunger I had buried for so long was no longer quiet. It demanded answers, and it demanded truth. Days passed, but instead of fading, that feeling only intensified. I found myself thinking constantly, questioning things I had never questioned before, noticing details I had previously ignored. It was like a veil had been lifted slightly, just enough for me to realize how much I did not understand. And then, one night, something happened that I still cannot fully explain. I was alone in my room, the lights dim, the world outside quiet, my thoughts louder than ever. I picked up my phone, not expecting anything, just trying to distract myself, to escape the noise in my mind for a moment. And that was when I saw it. A notification, simple, unfamiliar, completely unexpected. It was from an app I did not remember installing. My heart immediately started racing as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The icon was different from anything I recognized, and the words on the notification were even more confusing. It simply said, "You have a new verse." I froze. I knew instantly that this was not something I was supposed to have, not something that belonged in my world. My fingers hesitated above the screen, my mind racing with fear, questions, and something else I could not yet name. I told myself to ignore it, to delete it, to pretend it never appeared. That would have been the safe choice, the smart choice, the obedient choice. But something inside me would not let me walk away. Slowly, with a mixture of fear and curiosity that made my hands tremble, I tapped the notification. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone as the screen opened, and for a moment I just stared at it, eyes frozen, as if simply looking at it was already a betrayal. I remember glancing toward the door, listening for footsteps, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might give me away. Then my eyes fell back to the words on the screen, and everything else seemed to fade into silence. The first line I read was simple, but it did something to me that I cannot fully explain. It said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I did not understand why those words felt different, why they felt alive, personal, as if they were speaking directly into the place inside me that had been empty for so long. I read it again, slower this time, letting each word settle, and for the first time in my life, I felt something shift, something gentle but powerful, like a door opening inside my chest that I did not even know existed. There was no fear in those words, no threat, no pressure, just an invitation. And that alone was enough to confuse me because everything I'd been taught about God was built on fear and control, not rest and comfort. I should have closed the app right then. I should have deleted it and pretended none of this ever happened, but I could not. Something inside me needed more. That night, I stayed awake longer than I ever had before, sitting in my bed with the blanket pulled over my head to hide the faint glow of the screen, reading quietly, carefully, as if the words themselves were forbidden. Every sentence felt different from what I'd known, not just in meaning, but in tone. There was warmth in it, a kind of love that did not feel conditional, a voice that did not demand perfection before offering acceptance. And I found myself reading about Jesus, about how he spoke to people, how he treated those who were broken, those who were rejected, those who had nothing to offer, and instead of condemning them, he welcomed them. That idea alone unsettled me deeply because it contradicted everything I had been taught. My mind kept trying to reject it, to rationalize it, to remind me that this was dangerous, that I was crossing a line I could not come back from. But my heart would not let go. Night after night, I returned to those words, each time telling myself it would be the last, each time failing to walk away. I became careful, more aware of my surroundings than ever before, lowering my screen brightness to the minimum, keeping my phone hidden, constantly listening for any sound that might indicate someone was coming. Fear became my shadow. But it was different now. It was no longer just fear of punishment. It was fear of losing what I had found. Because for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never felt before. A sense of being seen, not by people, not by expectations, but by something deeper, something real. And yet, with that came overwhelming guilt. Every time I opened the app, a voice in my mind would accuse me, telling me I was betraying my family, my faith, my identity, everything I had ever known. I would close it sometimes, pressing the phone to my chest, trying to pray, trying to return to what was familiar. But the words felt empty now, hollow in a way they had never felt before. It scared me how quickly things were changing inside me, how something I had discovered by accident was beginning to reshape everything I thought I knew. One night, the weight of it all became too much. I had just finished reading another passage, and I felt overwhelmed, confused, afraid, and strangely drawn all at the same time. I sat there in the darkness, my hands trembling, my heart racing, and for the first time, I did something I had never done before. I spoke out loud, but not in the way I had been taught, not in the structured prayers I had memorized, not in the language of obligation. I spoke honestly. I did not even know who I was speaking to. I just whispered into the silence, "If you're real, if these words are true, then show me." My voice broke as I said it, because I knew there was no turning back from that moment, no way to pretend I had not crossed a line. Tears filled my eyes as I sat there, waiting, not expecting anything, yet somehow hoping for something I could not define. The room was still. Nothing changed outwardly, no sound, no sign, just silence. But inside me, something shifted again, deeper this time, like a quiet response that did not need words. I could not explain it, I could not understand it, but I knew in that moment that something had heard me. I lay down that night with my heart still racing, my mind overwhelmed, my emotions tangled between fear and something that felt like hope. I did not know then that everything was about to change in a way I could never have imagined, that my question would not remain unanswered, that my cry into the unknown would be met in a way that would shake me to my core. Because that night was not the end of my searching. It was only the beginning. The night it happened began like any other, quiet, controlled, predictable, and yet there was a strange heaviness in the air that I could not explain. Like something unseen was pressing in on me, something that made it hard to breathe even before anything had physically gone wrong. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, my phone in my hand, the same hidden glow beneath the blanket, reading words that had become my secret refuge, words that felt more real to me than anything in my visible world. But that night, I could not focus. My chest felt tight, my thoughts scattered, my heart beating faster than it should have been. At first, I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just anxiety, just the weight of everything I'd been carrying finally catching up with me. I stood up, pacing slowly across the room, trying to calm myself, whispering quiet prayers out of habit. But the words felt distant, disconnected, like they no longer reached anything beyond me. Then suddenly, without warning, the pain hit. It was sharp and overwhelming, spreading through my chest like fire, stealing the air from my lungs. I gasped, grabbing onto the edge of a table to steady myself, but my strength failed me almost instantly. My vision blurred, the room spinning as if the ground itself had shifted beneath me. Panic surged through me, raw and uncontrollable, as I realized I could not breathe. I tried to call out, but no sound came, only a broken whisper that never fully formed. My body collapsed to the floor, the cold surface pressing against my skin as everything around me began to fade. In those final moments, fear consumed me completely, not just fear of death, but fear of what came after. Every teaching I had ever heard rushed into my mind, every warning about judgment, every image of punishment, every uncertainty about whether I had done enough, whether I had been enough. I wanted to pray, to say something, anything, but my mind was too chaotic, my body too weak. And then, just as suddenly as the pain had come, everything went silent. The struggle stopped, the fear stopped, the darkness I expected did not come. Instead, I felt something I had never felt before: peace. It was not gradual, it was immediate, overwhelming, like stepping out of a storm into complete stillness. I became aware that I was no longer in my body. The pain was gone, completely gone, and I felt light, free in a way that made no sense to me. I looked down and saw my own body lying motionless on the floor, and for a moment, confusion replaced everything else. This was not what I had been taught would happen. There was no interrogation, no fear, no darkness closing in. Instead, I found myself surrounded by a light that was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not harsh, not blinding, but warm, alive, almost as if it carried presence within it. The space around me did not feel like a place I could describe. There were no walls, no boundaries, and yet it felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. I could feel something, someone, even before I saw anything clearly. A presence that was both powerful and gentle at the same time. My heart should have been racing. I should have been terrified, but I was not. The fear that had defined so much of my life was gone, completely absent, replaced by a calm that I did not understand. I stood there, or at least it felt like standing, and trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to hold on to some piece of what I had believed, but everything felt different here. And then, slowly, I became aware that I was not alone. At first, it was just a feeling, a deep awareness that someone was near, someone who saw me completely, not just my actions, but my thoughts, my fears, my hidden questions, everything I had ever tried to bury. I turned, though I cannot fully explain how, and that was when I saw him. Not as an idea, not as a distant concept, but as a real presence standing before me. Everything inside me reacted at once: awe, confusion, disbelief, and something deeper, something that felt like recognition, even though I had never seen him before. There was no fear in his presence, only a weight of truth that felt undeniable. I did not need anyone to tell me who he was. I knew. And in that moment, everything I thought I understood about God, about truth, about life and death, began to collapse all at once. I could not move, not because I was restrained, but because everything within me was overwhelmed by what I was seeing, by who I was standing before. And yet there was no fear in me, none of the terror I had expected, none of the judgment I had been taught would come at the moment of death. Instead, there was a presence that felt both powerful and gentle, a kind of authority that did not crush me, but somehow drew me closer. He looked at me, and I say that carefully, because it was more than just being seen. It felt like every part of me was known, every hidden thought, every suppressed question, every silent cry I had ever buried was laid open without shame. And then he spoke my name, and not in the formal, distant way I had always heard it, but in a way that felt deeply personal, as if he had always known me, as if I had always belonged to him even when I did not realize it. Zara. The way he said it made something break inside me, something that had been held tightly for years, something I did not even know I was carrying. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, to understand what was happening, but the words would not come. Instead, tears filled my eyes, not from fear, but from a kind of release I had never experienced before. He did not rush me, did not demand anything from me. He simply allowed me to be in that moment, fully seen and fully known. Then, without any movement that I could describe, it was as if everything around us shifted, and I began to see my life. Not in fragments, not in the way I remembered it, but clearly, completely, as if every moment was being revealed at once. I saw myself as a child, sitting on the cold floor, repeating words I did not understand. I felt again the fear, the pressure, the need to be perfect just to be accepted. I saw my younger self looking up, hoping for approval, hoping for love, and I felt a deep ache as I realized how much of my life had been driven by fear rather than connection. I saw my marriage, the distance, the silence, the way I had learned to disappear within my own life, to become what was expected instead of who I truly was. But what struck me the most was not the events themselves. It was the truth behind them. The way everything I had believed about God had shaped my existence into something heavy and lifeless. And yet, as I watched all of this, I did not feel condemned. There was no accusation in his presence, no anger, no rejection. Instead, there was understanding, a quiet compassion that made it impossible for me to hide anything. It was in that moment that I realized something that shook me to my core. The God I had feared all my life was not standing before me. This was someone entirely different. Someone who did not demand perfection before offering love. Someone who did not use fear as control. Someone who saw my brokenness and did not turn away from it. I felt exposed, completely vulnerable. And yet for the first time, I did not feel the need to hide. He showed me moments I had forgotten, the times I had felt that quiet emptiness, the nights I'd sat alone wondering why God felt so distant, the questions I'd buried because I was too afraid to face them. And then he showed me something else, and something I had never considered before. He showed me what it could have been like, a life where I was not bound by fear, where my relationship with God was not based on obligation but on love, where I could speak honestly without the fear of punishment. I saw glimpses of something I could not fully understand, moments of peace, of connection, of freedom that felt completely foreign to everything I had known. My mind struggled to comprehend it, to fit it into the framework I had been taught, but it did not fit. Nothing about this fit. And that was when he spoke again, not loudly, not forcefully, but with a clarity that left no room for doubt. He began to reveal truth, not as an argument, not as something to be forced upon me, but as something to be seen, to be understood. And what he showed me next was something I was not prepared for, and something that would challenge everything I had ever believed about God, about faith, and about the path I had been following my entire life. What he showed me next was not a single image or moment, but a series of scenes that unfolded around me like a reality I could step into. And with each one, something inside me began to shift in a way I could not stop, even if I wanted to. I saw people, so many people, standing in lines, kneeling in prayer, repeating words over and over again, their lips moving with precision, their bodies following familiar motions, and yet their eyes looked distant, empty, as if they were present physically, but absent internally. I recognized those movements because I had lived them. I had been one of them, performing devotion while carrying a quiet disconnection I could never explain. Then the scene changed, and I saw hearts, not physically, but something deeper, something that revealed what was happening inside those people. And what I saw was not peace, not certainty, but fear. Fear of not doing enough, fear of punishment, fear of getting it wrong. fear that never seemed to end no matter how much they tried to obey. My chest tightened as I realized I was watching the very system I had been raised in, not from the inside where everything is justified, but from the outside where the truth was impossible to ignore. I wanted to look away, to reject what I was seeing, but I could not. Then he showed me something different. I saw people again, but this time their posture was not rigid, their voices were not rehearsed, their expressions were not filled with fear. They were speaking openly, honestly, some with tears, some with quiet smiles, but all of them with something I'd never seen before, a sense of connection, of being heard, of being known. There was no performance, no pressure, just relationship. I could feel the difference, not just see it, and it stirred something deep within me that I had never allowed myself to explore. Then everything shifted again, and suddenly I was no longer just watching others. I was watching myself. I saw my own life, my own actions, my own prayers, but now I could see the truth behind them, the fear that motivated me, the emptiness I had tried to ignore, the constant striving to meet a standard that never brought peace. I saw how I had learned to perform rather than connect, how I had followed rituals without understanding, how I had silenced my own heart in order to survive. And in that moment, I understood something that broke me completely. I had spent my entire life trying to reach God, but I had never truly known him. Tears began to fall again as the weight of that realization settled over me, and I felt both grief and clarity at the same time. Then he turned my attention back to him, and there was a question in his presence, not spoken immediately, but felt deeply, like it was forming within the very core of my being. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle, but the weight of his words carried more power than anything I had ever heard. He asked me if I was willing to choose truth, even if it cost me everything. The question did not come with pressure, it was not forced, but it was undeniable. And in that moment, I understood exactly what he meant. Choosing truth would not be a simple decision. It would mean losing my family, my identity, my safety, everything I had ever known. It would mean stepping into uncertainty, into rejection, into a life I could not predict or control. My mind immediately filled with fear, images of my father's reaction, my husband's anger, the consequences I had seen others face. I hesitated, not because I did not recognize the truth, but because I knew the cost of accepting it. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of that decision, and for a moment I felt torn between two worlds, the one I had always known and the one being revealed to me. And then, just as I was about to respond, just as I felt something rising within me, everything began to fade. The light, the scenes, his presence, it all started to slip away, like I was being pulled back by something I could not control. A panic rose inside me as I reached out, not wanting it to end, not wanting to lose what I had just experienced. But it was already happening. The last thing I felt was his presence, steady and calm, even as everything else disappeared. And then I woke up. I woke up with a sharp gasp, my body jerking as air rushed back into my lungs like I had been drowning, my chest rising and falling uncontrollably as I tried to understand where I was, what had just happened, and why everything felt so different. The room was the same, the walls, the dim light, the silence. Nothing had changed outwardly, and yet inside me, everything was unrecognizable. I lay there for several seconds, maybe minutes, staring at the ceiling, my heart still racing, my mind struggling to process the experience that felt more real than anything I had ever known. It was not like a dream, not something distant or unclear. It was vivid, precise, alive in a way that left no room for doubt. I remembered every detail, every word, every feeling, especially his presence, the way he spoke my name, the way truth unfolded without force, the question he asked that still echoed inside me. I sat up slowly, my hands trembling as I looked around the room, almost expecting to see something different. Something that would confirm that what I experienced had followed me back. But there was nothing. Just the familiar surroundings that suddenly felt foreign, like I no longer belonged in the life I had once accepted without question. I placed my hand over my chest, feeling my heartbeat gradually slow. But the peace I had felt there, in that place beyond this world, was still present, faint but undeniable, like a quiet assurance that had not left me. And that was what unsettled me the most, because alongside that peace was the reality I could not escape. I was still here, still in the same environment, still surrounded by the same expectations, the same rules, the same dangers. But I was no longer the same person. I knew it instantly. Something inside me had shifted in a way that could not be undone. I tried to move through the morning as I normally would, performing the routines that had once defined my life, but everything felt different. When I stood to pray, the words would not come the same way. My lips moved, but my heart resisted, not out of rebellion, but because I had seen something deeper, something real. And I could no longer pretend that what I was doing held the same meaning it once did. I felt a strange tension inside me. Like two realities were colliding, the life I was living and the truth I had encountered. As the day continued, I became more aware of how my behavior had changed, how my reactions were no longer automatic, how my silence carried a different weight. And it did not go unnoticed. My mother looked at me longer than usual during breakfast, her eyes searching my face as if she sensed something she could not yet define. My husband spoke to me, but there was a distance in his tone, a subtle shift that suggested he felt it too, even if he did not understand it. The atmosphere around me began to change, slowly at first, like an invisible current moving beneath the surface. Conversations would pause when I entered a room. Glances lingered a little too long. Questions were asked in ways that felt less like curiosity and more like investigation. It was subtle, but it was there, and I could feel it growing. That afternoon, my father asked to see me. The moment I heard his voice, a familiar fear rose within me, but it was different now, not as overwhelming as it once was, because something else had taken root inside me, something stronger than fear, even if I did not fully understand it yet. I entered his study, the same room where decisions were made, where authority was absolute, where I had always felt small. He looked at me carefully, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken questions. Then he asked me if something was wrong. His tone was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, something that made it clear this was not a simple question. I hesitated, my mind racing. I knowing that whatever I said could change everything. I wanted to answer honestly, to express what I had experienced, what I had seen, but I also knew the consequences of speaking too openly. So I gave a careful response, something vague, something safe. But even as I spoke, I could see that he was not convinced. His eyes remained fixed on me, searching, evaluating, as if trying to uncover something hidden beneath my words. When I left that room, I knew, without being told, that things had shifted in a way that could not be reversed. The quiet tension that had been building was no longer just in my imagination. It was real, and it was growing. That night, as I sat alone again, the weight of everything pressed in on me. The experience I had gone through, the truth I could not deny, and the reality I was still trapped in. I knew I could not go back to who I was, but I also knew that moving forward would come with a cost I was not sure I was ready to pay. and deep down, I could feel it. Something was coming. Something that would force me to make a choice I could no longer avoid. The day everything collapsed did not begin with chaos. It began with silence. A silence so heavy, it felt like the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to arrive. I had barely slept the night before. My thoughts refused to settle, replaying everything I'd seen, everything I'd felt, everything I could no longer unknow. When I stepped out of my room that morning, I immediately sensed it. Something was different. The atmosphere was tense, controlled, deliberate, like the air itself had been prepared for confrontation. I did not know yet that I was about to be called into a moment that would decide the rest of my life. It happened just after midday. I was asked to come to the main study room. No explanation, no warmth in the request, just instruction. And I understood immediately that this was not a casual conversation. When I entered the room, I saw them all. My father was seated at the center, his presence calm but heavy with authority. Beside him were two elder men from the family, and my husband stood slightly behind them, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but distant in a way that made my stomach tighten. The door closed behind me, and I felt the finality of it. There would be no easy way out of this room. My father asked me to sit. I did. For a few seconds no one spoke. Then he began, his voice steady but firm, asking me if I had been behaving strangely, if I had been influenced by anything or anyone outside our faith. The question was not truly a question. It was an accusation wrapped in restraint. I could feel my pulse rising, but my face remained still. I knew what this was about. Somehow, they knew something had changed. Maybe they did not know everything, but they could feel the shift in me. My silence must have been answer enough, because the tone in the room changed immediately. My husband finally spoke, his voice sharper now, asking me directly if I had doubts, if I'd been questioning things I should not question. The words hit me harder than I expected, not because they were loud, but because they confirmed that my internal struggle was no longer hidden. It had become visible. I tried to respond carefully, choosing my words, but before I could finish, my father raised his hand slightly, stopping me. Then he spoke again, this time colder, telling me that confusion was dangerous, that curiosity could lead to destruction, that there were paths one could not return from once taken. I felt the weight of their eyes on me, all of them waiting, expecting, controlling the outcome of my response. And then it came, the demand. I was told to reject whatever influence had entered my mind, to reaffirm my loyalty, to return fully to what I had been taught. There was no discussion, no understanding, only instruction. My heart was beating so hard I thought they might hear it, but inside me, something strange was happening. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something else was rising. The memory of what I had seen, the presence I had felt, the question I'd been asked. And suddenly, I understood that this moment was the answer to that question. This was the cost. My father leaned forward slightly and said my name, slower this time, heavier, and told me I had a choice to make. Either I correct myself immediately, or I accept the consequences of deviation. The word consequences was not explained. It did not need to be. We all understood what it meant. My throat felt tight, my hands cold, but my mind was clearer than it had ever been. I looked at each of them, my father, my husband, the elders, and I realized they were not asking me to think. They were asking me to surrender what I now knew was true. The silence stretched again, longer this time, unbearable. And then I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it did not shake. I said I could not deny what I had experienced. The room shifted instantly. I and my husband straightened, disbelief turning into anger. One of the elders muttered something under his breath. My father closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the weight of what I had just said. Then everything erupted. Voices rose, overlapping, demanding explanations, accusing, pressuring, trying to pull me back into silence. But inside me, something had settled. I was afraid, yes, but I was no longer lost. The confrontation escalated quickly. I was told I was being deceived, that I was endangering not only myself, but everyone around me, that I needed to repent immediately. My father's voice cut through the noise, sharper now, telling me that I was still his daughter, and I still had a chance to correct my path. Then came the final demand: reject it, say it is nothing, return. I felt tears building in my eyes, not just from fear, but from grief, because I understood what I was losing in that moment. My family, my place, my identity as I had known it. And yet, in the center of that grief, I also felt something unshakable. Peace. It did not make sense. It did not align with the chaos around me. But it was there, and it was steady. I closed my eyes for a moment, and in that silence inside me, I remembered the question I had been asked beyond this world. Will you choose truth, even if it costs you everything? When I opened my eyes again, I gave my answer. I said I could not deny what I knew. The room went still. And in that stillness, I understood that everything had changed forever. I did not leave that room as the same person who had entered it, because something had ended inside me the moment I spoke my truth. And something else had begun, something unknown, something frightening, something strangely peaceful at the same time. No one followed me immediately. No one stopped me physically, but I could feel the shift behind me, like a door had closed that would not be opened again in the same way. I walked through the halls of the house I had grown up in, the place that had once defined my entire existence, and everything felt different, like I was seeing it for the first time without the filter of belonging. The silence was no longer comforting. It was heavy, final. When I reached my room, I closed the door and stood there for a long time, not moving, not thinking clearly, just breathing, trying to understand what had just happened to my life. My phone vibrated repeatedly. Messages, calls, demands, some from family, some from people I barely had the strength to read. I did not open them. I already knew what they would say. My father's words echoed in my mind, but louder still was the memory of what I had seen, what I had felt, the presence that had not demanded fear, but revealed truth. That night, everything I had ever known was gone, not physically, but relationally, emotionally, spiritually. I'd crossed something that could not be uncrossed. The next days blurred together in ways I still struggle to fully explain. I was no longer treated the same. Conversations became shorter, colder. Looks carried judgment instead of familiarity. I was no longer included in discussions that once defined my life. The world I belonged to began to close itself around me, slowly but deliberately, like a circle tightening until there was no space left inside it for who I'd become. And yet, even in that isolation, I was not alone. Because something had awakened inside me that I could not silence anymore. I began searching again for the words I'd read before, the words that had first reached into my emptiness. I opened them again in secret, trembling at first, afraid of what it meant to return to them after everything that had happened. But instead of fear, I found something else waiting for me there. Stability, clarity, a presence that felt the same as it had before, unchanged by everything I'd lost. I began to understand that what I had encountered was not a moment of confusion, but a beginning. A call I could not ignore anymore. I found myself praying differently now, not with memorized words or formal structure, but with honesty, with brokenness, with questions I no longer tried to hide. And in those moments, I felt something respond, not in sound, but in peace that settled deep within me. It did not erase the pain. It did not restore my family. It did not fix the consequences of my choice, but it gave me strength to stand in them. Weeks passed. I was eventually separated from much of my former life. Some relationships became distant. Some were cut off completely. There were moments of grief so intense I thought I would collapse under them. Moments where I questioned everything again. Moments where the weight of loss felt unbearable. But even then, I could not go back. Because going back would mean denying what I'd seen, and I could no longer do that. Instead, I found something I never expected. A community, quietly, carefully, through hidden connections, through messages, through people I had never met physically, but who understood my language of loss and discovery. And they spoke of Jesus not as an idea, but as someone alive, someone present, someone who did not abandon those who came to him broken. For the first time, I began to understand what belonging without fear meant. Not immediate healing, not instant restoration, but steady rebuilding. Slowly, I learned to breathe again without fear pressing on my chest. I learned to speak without rehearsing every word in my mind. I learned that faith, real faith, was not about performance, but relationship. And through it all, I carried both grief and gratitude together. Grief for everything I lost, gratitude for everything I found. And now, as I tell you this story, I'm not asking you to simply agree with me. I'm asking you to listen with your heart, because I know what it is to be afraid of truth, and I know what it is to discover it anyway. I do not know what your journey looks like. I do not know what questions you are carrying, but I know this. I was once lost in fear, and now I am not. I was once silent, and now I am speaking. And if my voice has reached you, then maybe it is because you are not meant to stay where you are either. So I will end with this, not as pressure, but as invitation. Seek truth honestly. Do not be afraid of where it leads, because for me, it led to loss, yes, but also to something far greater than I ever imagined. It led me to Jesus.